What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly, and today we're joined by Seth Feingersh. And you might not know who Seth is, but there's a very good chance that you've listened to the podcast that he used to work on, and that's because Seth is the former audio engineer of the GaryVee Audio Experience. He's recently transitioned over to a role with VaynerTalent, but I'm very excited to have him here on the show today. Seth, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, glad to be here.
Where I want to start today's podcast is where you first got into audio. If I'm correct, it was in high school, right?
It was, yeah. I picked up. I've been playing music for a long time, or I played music for a long time. And when I got to high school, I picked up bass guitar, and I got into it. Me and a couple of my friends formed a band, and we wanted to put some of our music that we were playing out on the internet, which was at the time a pretty new thing, and like Soundcloud had kind of just launched. And I was like, I like technology. I can figure out how to record us. That's a thing. Let me download Audacity and buy a cheap interface and figure it out. So that was sort of my first foray into audio. And from there, I just, I didn't really know what I wanted to go to college for. So I took that as hey, this is something I enjoy. I like music, so I can combine these two and go to college for it. So why not? So went to college for it. I went to SUNY Purchase, which is a state university here in New York, for a degree in what was called studio production, which was just basically recording arts. So it was focused mainly around music production and being in the studio and producing albums and songs and all that. And halfway through college, I kind of realized that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be stuck in a studio all day. I liked being around people and interacting. So after college, I sort of I had no idea what I wanted to do. I worked at a Starbucks, I worked at a Red Mango, I bartended, I lifeguarded, I worked a couple catering jobs, just a lot of random things to help me figure out what I wanted to do. And eventually I fell into 3D printing. So I started working for this company called MakerBot, who were on kind of the first foray into the 3D printing bubble. Started working retail for them in Connecticut, where I was living at the time. Worked my way up to a position back home in New York, which is where I'm from, and then started doing a couple other odd jobs for them. I worked account management. I worked competitive intelligence, which was something that I had no idea what it was, but they gave me the opportunity to try it, and it was my first step into a corporate environment. So I was like, yeah, why not? I'll give it a shot. Got hit in a round of layoffs with them, and then started to sort of meander my way back into what I enjoyed and what I knew and what I really loved doing, which was inherently creating and creating video and audio. So I started working for a company called Shapeways, which is another 3D printing company, but they're a 3D printing service, doing their social media, which at the time, I knew the concepts and the basics around social. I just had never managed a company's social media before, but they were willing to try me out and let me, create content for them. And I said, all right, let's do it. I'll learn some stuff along the way. And I sort of just fell back in love with creation. So I started doing some video content for them, managing on the social channels. And then about almost 2 years in, I got the opportunity to work here at VaynerMedia on Team Gary, doing Gary's podcast, which was through a series of connections through my girlfriend at the time, now fiance, had been in advertising for a long time, and she started working at VaynerMedia on the actual agency side. Talked to somebody randomly here at the company who said hey, I think Team Gary's looking for someone. Do you know anybody who's interested? And she went, oh wow, my boyfriend went to school for audio. Let me ask him. One thing led to another, and now I'm here. And I did Gary's podcast for about 2 years, along with a number of other voice and audio and podcast related things within the agency. I produced and edited a bunch of Ask GaryVees, and around my 2-year mark here, I started to kind of think hey, what's my next step? I love this environment. I love the VaynerX world. I love the people that I work around and the people that I work with. And it just so happened that around then, an opportunity opened up in VaynerTalent, and that was a really clear next step for me. I fell in love with the personal branding space, which is what VaynerTalent really focuses on. They basically replicate the GaryVee model for other clients, whether that's creating a vlog or a podcast or anything kind of in the content space, just within another, for paying clients. And now I'm here.
That's awesome. But just kind of going back a little bit, what was the name of that band that you were in high school?
Ryder, Ryder. And I'm sure there's still something online.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to look up some of the old Rider songs. But I did want to have a conversation with you around education and more specifically college, university, post-secondary, because audio was something that you were clearly interested in before school. You decided to go to school for it, but then it took you a really long time after graduating to find yourself back in the industry working with audio. So do you think that it's necessary to go to college?
I don't think it's necessary from a technical standpoint, but I do think that I gained very valuable like life and people skills while I was there. I didn't live at home. I didn't commute. I lived on campus. And I think the connections that I made and the people that I met and just the experience of not being at home and being out in the world and having to live on my own were the most valuable takeaways that I got. I definitely learned things within the audio world too. That it wasn't just a solely a cultural experience. But if I were to do it again, I would still go to college. I would still get that experience in those 4 years of being able to really just like test life and figure out what I wanted and figure out what I liked and get to play with some cool equipment along the way too.
But when you ultimately got back into the industry and started at Vayner, you weren't a full-time employee technically, right? Like you were a resident.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I left a full-time job with benefits for what was essentially an adult internship, which was a super scary thing. But at the time, I just kind of thought to myself, like, hey, I think I was what, 26 at the time? Yeah, I was 26. And I was like, there's no other time in my life that I can just take this risk. And if it works out, awesome. That's amazing. It'll be probably the best thing that I've ever done in my life. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll figure it out. Like it's not the worst, it was a risk. It was scary. It was a very, very, very hard decision for me. But it's something that I don't regret one bit.
And for people that don't know, what's the difference between a full-time employee and a resident employee? Is it basically just like you don't get your benefits and stuff like that?
Pretty much, yeah. You have a 3-month contract where they test you out. And it varies obviously between different parts of the company. But for the most part, it's just like, yep, they're testing you out. They don't want to put the full investment into you yet. They want to make sure that you're right for the team and that the team's right for you. And yeah.
So what were your roles and responsibilities when you first started at Vayner? Did you pretty much jump straight into editing the GaryVee Audio Experience?
Yeah, I did. And it was something that really surprised me. I didn't expect to be, on day number, I think it was probably day number 2, because I had to go through orientation for them to just sit me down and be like, hey, like, here's a keynote, make it sound good, throw an intro and outro on it, and here's how to schedule the episode. Go for it.
Do you remember the exact podcast episode that was the first one you worked on?
Oh, that's a good question. I could tell you probably the date, but I couldn't tell you the exact name of it. I'm actually going to write that down and look that up later because I'm also really curious.
Yeah, I was just curious to go back and see if we could listen to the very first ever podcast episode that you edited. But so did you basically edit every single podcast episode after that point up until 2 years later when you transitioned out?
Yeah, every single episode. I think save for a couple right before I switched teams, just because I was away for a friend's wedding in India, and I just didn't really have access to internet at that point.
So talk to me about that process of releasing a new podcast episode every single day. I'm assuming there's a bunch of scheduling that went into it, but what all had to happen in order for you to release a brand new podcast episode every single day?
It was really about finding ways to cut time on my end. It also depended, like inherently a lot of Gary's content was reused. So some of it was keynotes, some of it was business meetings, but there were also the native episodes, like a lot of the GaryVee episodes, or all of the GaryVee episodes, and some of the ancillary, like the pod sessions episodes that we created, and there was a couple brown paper bags ones. There was a couple actual podcast ones and a couple ones that were just reused content that were either mashups or keynotes or business meetings that we would try to make flow into a good podcast. I definitely scheduled. I tried my own way that I like to work, is I like to get as far ahead as possible, and that way it's less stress on me day to day. But I would, push to keep a consistent 4 episodes ahead, and that way I didn't have to worry about if I scheduled something on a Thursday evening for Tuesday morning, I knew that I wasn't coming in the first thing Monday and going, oh crap, I have to figure out something for tomorrow. Like, let me panic and look for something. Yeah.
When you say you have to look for something, does that mean that you're combing through content to try and find things that would make good podcast episodes? So it's not like, hey, take this keynote, turn it into a podcast, take this clip, turn it into a podcast. You kind of have to comb through everything yourself.
It was a mix of the two. It was very heavily relied on me to comb through and find either old business meetings or create mashups around a certain topic that were, the top 5 things that you should be thinking of if you're under 30, or, things that we thought would gain traction and gain attention and be really, really valuable to the listener. So that would actually be one example. Gary obviously has a lot of younger followers, and it's somebody that he likes to talk to. So I would go back through old episodes of Ask GaryVee. I would go back through old meetings and keynotes and search and try to find these little tidbits that I could cut and create a kind of a storyline of information that would then help the listener.
And with producing all these different podcast episodes, like you said, sometimes it's in studio and you get that perfect sounding audio, but sometimes it's like the airplane project where Gary records it on his cell phone on a loud airplane. So what's it like dealing with all the differing audio qualities?
That's a good one. There's definitely some cleanup involved. The airplane project was probably one of the tougher ones for me. When I heard it, when D-Rock and I heard it, we kind of looked at each other and we're like, oh man, this is not the best quality, but let's figure it out. And it just took, I spent time on processing, and I learned some new techniques myself during that. Whereas for something like the Ask GaryVee show, where it's 2 mics and then the phone line, it's a lot of me just in post, making it sound, putting a little bit of compression on, putting a little bit of EQ on, making it sound nice, and making it sound like a podcast. It's obviously, not obviously maybe, but it's definitely easier when I have full control over, where I'm putting the mic and what mic we're using. And, I'm setting up everything that's from the point that he's speaking into the computer and controlling that experience rather than getting a file that's sent on an iPhone. But you definitely learn how to just roll with the punches and make things work. And you also learn that not everything has to be 100% perfect. That sometimes it's more about just the meaning behind the content and less about the production quality, which is something that took me a while to accept and really realize.
I was actually going to ask that if audio quality matters, because if I remember correctly, the airplane project blew up. Like, people loved it.
Yeah. In an ideal world, everything is professionally produced and has a professional quality podcast mic in front of whoever's talking's face. But I think that there's definitely a point where the delta between importance and production quality exists. I think that, especially in Gary's case, if he's really passionate about something and something just falls right into his mind that he has to get out and he just records it on an iPhone, then there can be a lot more value in that than something that is professionally produced but doesn't necessarily provide as much value, especially to his listeners. Granted, I think it varies depending on who's putting out the content and who the face behind it is. I think that if you have a consistently professionally produced podcast, having one episode where it's really out there is a little bit jarring to the listener, but it also depends on what the content is.
So with that in mind, just when it comes to starting a podcast, I've heard you talk about how easy it is to start your own. So can you give me like a 30-second rundown of just a quick, easy way to start your own today?
Go to the App Store, whether you're on Google or an iPhone, download Anchor, and just go. I'm a really big proponent of Anchor, and I'm not paid to say that, just because of how accessible they're making podcasting to anybody who wants to start. You can literally just download it, speak into your phone, or have a conversation with somebody else on another phone, and publish it to every single platform that matters in podcasting with one button. And it's really, especially now that they're bought by Spotify, it's really a mind-blowing experience. And they've come a super long way from when we originally started looking into them, where they were more of like a social network, and now they've become one of the best distribution platforms ever.
I wanted to ask you about this, and I think I saw it on your LinkedIn, but I'm pretty sure one of your responsibilities was coming up with unique ways to promote the podcast.
Yes. Yeah. I was definitely involved in, if you look through Gary's Instagram and Facebook, figuring out ways to create native-ish content that would then drive to the podcast. So that's, audio waveforms with text over it that, have the audio experience logo in the back, that the link out then goes to the podcast, or kind of things like that. It's creating content that the listener knows what they're about to get into. It's in my head.
That's interesting when you say to create content with the waveform on it, because whenever I thought of creating content for the podcast, I always figured I needed a video to hook people. But you think it's almost better to make content with the waveform so people understand it's a podcast when they're getting into it?
I think it can be. I don't think it necessarily is, though. I think it depends on the situation. It can, as we've seen, it can go either way. There's been content that doesn't have video, but is that sort of just waveform that's performed awesome, and there's also been ones that just haven't performed well at all. Likewise, there's been videos that have performed awesome, and there's been videos that haven't performed well at all as well. So I think it's a mixture of the two. Obviously, Instagram and Facebook and a lot of the platforms that everybody's really on right now are highly visual. So if you can create a compelling piece of visual content that makes somebody stop and watch, there's a much better chance of somebody clicking through to your podcast than if it's just like nothing. Like, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, totally. But I was going to ask if there's anything else that you tried that worked, or maybe things that didn't work, just kind of advice that you have for people that are trying to get downloads to their own podcast.
I want to say one of the top performing paid posts that we did, or one of the top performing paid things we did, was just literally a selfie, Gary talking to the camera, and saying like, hey, like, this is, if you want to hear a podcast that has business and I don't remember exactly what he said, but swipe up and listen. It was a very, very simple, very native IG story that worked super well. So I would say, I guess, making sure that you're being native to the platform is most important.
That's fair, but I was going to ask what it's like working with GaryVee on a daily basis. Now, I understand it's not every single day because he's in and out of the office all the time, but what is it like working with him all the time?
In a word, exciting. And I think that doesn't come as much of a surprise. But he is exactly who you see in his content. But he's also one of the most understanding human beings in the world. If you screw something up and you own up to it, it's not, and obviously this is a degree to how big of a screw up it is, but if you mess something up and it's obviously a very scary thing. But if you just own up to it and kind of explain what happened, he's very empathetic and very understanding, and mistakes happen when you're putting out, all the content that you're putting out in a day. I've learned, I think, more than I've ever learned. I've learned more in the last 2 years being here than I've learned in my entire life. And I've learned not only technical skills, but also people skills and life skills, and, making sure that I'm thinking of things in another person's point of view, just because of being so close to his content and being so close to him, and hearing kind of what his message is, and his really, message of positivity and empathy. It's been amazing, honestly.
Is there any other key learnings that kind of just jump to your mind that you've taken away over your 2 years at Vayner?
Speed matters. Being fast and not letting something just sort of dwell around, and producing content at scale, not necessarily at complete precision. I'm trying to think, like, I'm trying to put it into a more eloquent way, but just like being nice to people really pays off, and putting yourself out there pays off. And like anything that I was asked to do, pretty much anything that I was asked to do within the agency that was audio related, I would just, it didn't necessarily have to be on Team Gary. It could be somewhere within VaynerMedia. I just said yeah to, because I figured, hey, I'll meet people this way, and I'll just help. I'm natively helping people out. Why the hell not?
Now, there's not really any good segue to this question, but it's something that's been on my mind for a while. It's been bugging me. I've really wanted to know the answer to this. Is Gary as good at NES hockey as he claims to be?
Yes. I don't think I've seen him lose once. It's come close, but yeah, no, he's pretty damn good. I got a couple goals in him, but ultimately.
That's cool. I just was really interested to know the answer to that one. But what is your day-to-day at Vayner like? I know not every day is the same, but kind of from a general perspective, what does it look like on a day-to-day basis?
It really varied. For the most part, it was a lot of searching through content and finding finding clips and finding content and creating, Instagram clips. But it also could be, it could be recording an Ask GaryVee with T-Pain. It could be really a number of things. I wouldn't say that there was one specific or typical day. It definitely, it varied constantly. And that's one of my favorite things about it. And it's still like that too. I mean, we on VaynerTalent try to move at a fast pace as well. So.
And you mentioned T-Pain coming into the office. Now, I know celebrities are coming in and out of the office all the time. Is there any one story that really sticks out to you from someone famous coming into the office?
I guess my favorite one personally was the pod sessions we shot with Jerry Ferrara and who else was it? Jerry Ferrara, Liz from New York City, from the New York City Instagram, and Danielle Snyder from Danny Joe. And I am pretty, I keep my composure pretty well around celebrities and bigger name people. And it's sort of just, you realize like these are just people too. Like there's nothing really big special, but Jerry Ferrara is like one of the only people that I had to get a picture with just because I was such a huge fan of Entourage.
And speaking of celebrities, I feel like people on Team GaryVee and just Vayner as a whole kind of gain a level of fame and notoriety just for working at Vayner. So from like your perspective, have you gained any like some level of fame just from working there?
Definitely picked up some Instagram followers. I think that it's also very dependent on how much you want to put yourself out there. And how much content you're producing. Like I've definitely slowed down a little bit and I've focused more on posting things that I just want to post and really not thinking about like, hey, will this get me followers? Which, self-admittedly, I've definitely done before. And being close to the sun, you definitely do gain some traction. And before I started working here, I had, I think maybe 200 followers and it pretty rapidly shot up to over 1,000. I went, oh my God, like this is crazy. This is really cool. But at the same time, like I don't have a huge interest in building my Instagram just for followers or just for fame. I want to post what I want to post. And it's something that I've definitely realized recently. Yeah. I mean, being close to the sun wears off a little bit for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've already talked to you about what it was like working specifically for Gary, but now let's talk about Team GaryVee. That's just a group of highly motivated, skilled people. And I was wondering what it was like going into work every day, knowing that you're working with that specific group of people.
Oh, incredible. There's nothing more motivating than when the people around you are also motivated and love what they're doing. It's intoxicating in a good way. And it pushes you to make yourself better every single day. When you're around people that enjoy what they're doing, you enjoy what you're doing, and it just carries through. And it's an incredible feeling. It's not having to not coming into work on a Monday and thinking, oh crap, it's Monday, like whatever, is a great feeling. When you really, really enjoy what you do, you really have one.
Do you have any fun stories of Caleb Ralston or Brandon Hatcher? They're just two previous guests on the podcast. People that have been listening for a while will recognize those names. So I was wondering if you had any fun stories of either of those two.
I'm sure I have stories about Caleb, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Brandon, I just recently really started working closer with now that I'm on VaynerTalent. But Caleb, I definitely spent some time with. They're both amazing, amazing guys. And they're incredible at what they do. I can't think of any specific funny stories though off the top of my head.
Yeah, no worries. Like that's a bit of a weird, tough question. Like I didn't really expect you to have too much of an answer, like just if anything popped in your mind. But I mean, you can't really prepare. Like that's probably not a question you're thinking that I'm going to ask you coming into this unless I tell you in advance. But not only did you work on the GaryVee Audio Experience, but you also worked on Gary's Alexa skill, GaryVee 365. I was just wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I would say. So Gary likes to be on the forefront of new technologies and new things, and voice is definitely one of those. So right after I joined the team, he wanted to build an Alexa skill. So we built a flash briefing, which if you're not familiar with Alexa, a flash briefing is sort of a skill within Alexa that you ask Alexa, Alexa, what's my day look like? Or Alexa, what's my flash briefing? Or Alexa, good morning. And it reads you, a snippet of news from CNN or a quote from whoever. So we decided that the best and quickest move that we could make was to create just a flash briefing skill for Gary that would be 1 to 3 minutes of a clip from either like an IG post or something from a keynote, or just a like powerful snippet of audio that a listener could recall and get served in the mornings or in the evenings, whenever they're listening to their flash briefing. Pretty quickly after we released it and people started using it, they then also launched it for the Echo Show. So we incorporated a video portion into it as well. I'm not 100% sure how it's doing since I've stopped doing it, but that was another thing that I just sort of scheduled and had ready every single day for 600 or 700 and X amount of days, however many days, almost just about 2 years.
And obviously audio is the future. We've all heard Gary say that over and over again for the last couple of years now. But what about specifically podcasting? Do you have any predictions for the future of podcasting? Do you think it'll remain free forever? Could you ever see a scenario where it moves to like a subscription-based model?
Ooh, that's a good one. So Luminary's definitely proven that subscription-based models are tough. If I'm not mistaken, and I haven't been following them as close as I probably should, but they went from being a solely subscription-based model to also incorporating a free version. I don't think that podcasts are going to become solely subscription-based just because of how they've been. And I think that YouTube kind of shows a similar model to that, and that like it's free content and people want to put out free content. And the way that they generate revenues through advertisers and through other means. I hopefully see podcast analytics becoming better. I would say that that's the one detriment right now to podcasts in general is and I'm sure if you've taken a look at your back end, it's really, really bare bones. Like you get downloads and you get geographical locations people are listening to and devices that people are listening on, as well as like the platforms. But past that, you don't get a lot of data on your listener. You really don't. And the most effective way to get more information about your listener that we found is to have them hit you up on social and just create a direct connection that way. So my predictions, I hope, are that the analytics get better. And I think it's being shown a little bit in Apple and Spotify's individual backends, but there's still a long way to go.
No, I agree. I think that the analytics are pretty bare bones right now, and it'd be really good if they could kind of make them a little bit more robust. But I mentioned earlier how you're no longer doing the audio experience. You actually have recently transitioned over to VaynerTalent. So why did you decide to do that move?
I wanted to take my next step within the company. I decided that, as much as I love Gary and as much as I really am loyal to him and his content, I was just ready to take my next step within the company. I liked personal branding. I figured that out pretty quickly. And VaynerTalent is the arm of the company that does personal branding just for clients. So there just happened to be right place, right time, an opening available. And I said, yeah, let's talk about it. I set a time with Gary. I talked to him about it and he agreed that it was a good move for me and supported it fully. And I talked to him on a Wednesday, and by Monday, I was switching teams.
So is your job similar now that you've moved over to VaynerTalent? Are you still primarily doing audio, or are you doing some video in there now as well, too?
Definitely more focused on audio than I was before. On Gary's team, I was doing a lot of video as well. Now I'm focused a lot more heavily just on audio.
And so what was it about personal branding that really resonated with you?
I don't know. It fascinates me. Kind of, I guess, growing up watching personal brands become a thing, especially on social, it just, making somebody else known is just fascinating to me. And I really, really enjoy it.
So from your time with VaynerTalent and watching GaryVee grow his personal brand over the last couple of years, do you have any tips for people that are trying to flush out and grow their own personal brand?
Yeah, don't stop putting out content. Just put out as much as you can and can afford to. I would say that's the biggest one, and things take time. Like, you can put out 40 podcast episodes and it might not hit the top 100 on iTunes, but that 41st one that you put out might be what makes you just kind of explode. And there might be something in there that really resonates with somebody that when they share it, for some reason it just goes viral and goes crazy, and then you are the next big thing.
Well, in my case, I really hope that it's the 40-second episode that pops off, because that's the one that we're recording right now.
Nice. Well played. I almost got the number right there.
Yeah, you're actually really close there. But With your love of personal branding, why don't you really spend too much time in the grand scheme of things working on your own? Like you produce some content for your Instagram, but not a whole lot, not much for your YouTube or anything like that. So kind of what's the decision behind that? Like, are you just too busy to be producing your own content, or is there another reason?
No, I like focusing on other people, honestly. I've thought about it, and I've thought about ways to grow mine. And for me, maybe it's honestly just me being lazy, and I can kind of self-admit that. But I do think it's important, and I think it's a really important thing to have, especially now, when you're, depending on what industry you're in, but if you're out job searching, companies are going to look at your social media and see what kind of a person you are, and just like how you go about life. And I think having a presence in general is important.
Do you think that down the line, maybe you'll look at starting your own podcast or a YouTube show or something?
I could see it. I've thought about it. I just don't know exactly what I would talk about. And maybe that's something that I figure out later on in life, and something that I can flush out. When it just kind of pops in my head. But I'm not 100% sure what I would focus it on. I mean, I have hobbies outside of audio and outside of podcasting, so it would probably be that, just to be able to think about a different thing. But I'm honestly not sure.
I was actually going to ask about your hobbies, because what I've seen from your Instagram and your stories and stuff, you're really into cars.
I am. That is a hobby that I've had since I was a really young kid. My mom always tells me the story about how I guess my babysitter when I was young had a Volkswagen Jetta, and I would get in the car and I'd sit in the backseat and I'd point out every single Jetta on the highway. And it's a really weird skill that I've had for a very long time, of just like, I can name almost anything that drives down the street. I know what make, model, and approximate year it is. But cars are a huge hobby of mine. I fell in love with the automotive world really young, and it's not easy to have a car in New York City, especially like growing up here. I couldn't get my license until I was 17, and I just, like, from age 12 on, I was like, oh, but I'm tall enough. Like, let me get behind the wheel. It'll be fun. I know what I'm doing, totally. And it's something that I just recently, after having a car on and off, I just said, screw it. I'm gonna invest a little bit in my hobby, and I bought a car that I knew that I didn't want to have to bring to a shop every time something went wrong with. And it's forced me to get a little uncomfortable and figure out how to fix things myself. And that's something that I'm both really proud of and really, really excited about.
So with knowing that cars is a big interest of yours from a really young age, why then did you decide to go to school for audio? Why'd you pick audio and not auto?
It's funny. I've thought of that a bunch, and I don't know. I guess because I don't know exactly what I would do in the automotive field. Like, I'm not great at math, so engineer was definitely out of the picture. I'm not great at design or drawing, so design was definitely out of the picture. I think that journalist would have been a cool move for me, but it's just not what I ended up focusing on. And at the time, when I was making that decision, YouTube wasn't really a huge thing, and independent auto journalism wasn't a huge thing. It was like you would write for like Road and Track or Motor Trend or Car and Driver, and they produce some sort of video, but it was nothing like it is today. I think if I were to kind of do it over today, I would definitely learn video production earlier, and just start kind of doing my own reviews, or videos about how to fix X on this model, and stuff like that.
So if you were to start that automotive page, how would you go about growing it? I know we've talked about podcasts, but this is looking at it more from a social media perspective. How would you look to grow that account?
Definitely micro clips, which and by micro clips I mean Instagram. So I'd put it out on YouTube for sure. If I'm doing it like a how to repair or something similar to that. Take clips from the YouTube video that I've created and from the sequence in Premiere, and format them in a way that would work well on Instagram. DM them to other popular, automotive influencers, and make sure you're obviously using the correct hashtags in your post too. But just kind of like create content that I think would show off my ability to do what I want to do at a professional level. So do car reviews, do repair reviews, and then hit up people at Road and Track or Jalopnik or at any of the major automotive publications that are putting out video, and be like, hey, like this is what I can do. Do you guys need help with anything? Like, can I help with anything? Or do you have a position open? That's also a very fair thing to ask. Or you start it with, can I work for free? Can I just intern with you guys? And I think it depends on obviously, I think it depends on what point in your life you're at to work for free, but that's a separate conversation, I guess.
And what about somebody that's kind of like middle of the road? I feel like whenever we ask about growing a podcast or social media, it's always from square one. How are you going to get listeners when you start and kind of grow this thing? But what about somebody in my perspective, my situation, where they've been doing it for a while, around a year now, their downloads are okay, like nothing's too crazy, no crazy growth. Like what would your advice be to somebody in that situation?
Keep doing it, but reach out to more people. I mean, it's different for every case. It's not necessarily going to be the same thing for you as it is for somebody else. But it's just keep trying different things. And I don't necessarily know exactly what those different things are. But I do agree with Gary that reaching out to people that you want to get in contact with or that you admire is definitely a good move. You never know who's going to reply.
When you say reach out to people, do you mean from like a guest perspective and try and get new people, bigger people on that maybe I wouldn't have thought to ask before?
Could be, yeah. I think that also having, and this is something that I've definitely seen work, is like, let's say if you found somebody that you're super into that has a big following, creating a piece of content for them to post saying like, hey, my episode just went live, like listen to this interesting snippet of a piece of the conversation. And just sending it to them, not necessarily with an expectation that they will post, but like, if you create a clip for somebody and you send it to them after you've talked to them, if they had a good time and they enjoyed the conversation, they could be inclined to be like, hey, like, check out, I was just on this podcast, check it out, like link in my bio or swipe up, da-da-da.
And now with working at VaynerTalent, I don't expect you to tell the names of the people you've worked on, assuming that's confidential. But when you're helping these people build their personal brands, do you notice any similar traits amongst all of your clients? I just assume that a majority of them are successful people already. So is there any kind of traits that stand out that all of these successful people all share?
Not necessarily, quite honestly. It's all very different.
Oh, that's really interesting. I was expecting to hear kind of like some similarities across all of them. But with your move to VaynerTalent, that was because you felt that was just like the next step for you after working on Team Gary for 2 years. So with that in mind, what is kind of your big picture, your long-term plan? What do your next kind of 2, 3, 4 moves look like?
Ooh, it's honestly something that I haven't thought a ton about. But what I do see in my near future, I love the team that I'm working with. I love the team that I'm working on. And I'm just excited to help VaynerTalent grow and scale and become maybe a bigger part of the VaynerX organization than it is. As for my next move, I honestly have no idea. It's honestly something that I've never at any point in my life really thought super far ahead about. And I don't 100% know.
I don't think you need to know. I feel like everyone always feels the need to have this big picture, long-term plan, but I think it's okay kind of just hanging out, living in the moment and enjoying where you're at.
I agree.
One thing I was curious about was I've heard you talk about on a previous podcast, imposter syndrome. So I just wanted to ask you about that and hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah. I mean, I still get it. I think it's completely natural and I think everybody gets it. There's points where I guess you realize that, hey, I like, whether it's in a meeting or whether it's just after you do something and, if I have taken a piece of audio that doesn't necessarily sound great and make it sound much better, there's little things that you have to kind of realize. And I'm also by no means a therapist or psychologist, just to preface that, but like, there's definitely little things that you need to hold on to when you get those little bursts of like, oh crap, I know what I'm doing. Like, I'm not just here because I'm flying by the seat of my pants, or I'm not just here, faking it until I make it, but I actually do know what I'm doing. And holding on to those little things I found and remembering them and kind of putting them back into your mind really, really helps. That said, I think that everybody experiences imposter syndrome in one way or another at one time or another, whether or not they admit it or to themselves or not. And it's definitely still something that I get, every once in a while. I don't think it's something that will ever go away because you're always learning something new. You're always being exposed to a new situation. You're not doing the same exact thing every day in a completely repetitive motion. And just being in those new situations is, that slight anxiety that you may get, or that, I definitely get sometimes. I think is completely natural. And all you can do is dig back into your thoughts and kind of push ahead those few things that you're like, oh no, like I know what I'm doing, and people recognize what I'm doing, that I know what I'm doing, et cetera, et cetera.
And this next question isn't in the context of imposter syndrome, but has there ever been a situation where you've kind of looked around and been like, wow, I can't believe that I'm here right now?
Yeah. I try to do it more and more. Obviously, in the beginning, starting working here, that definitely happened, and honestly, that happened when I started working at Shapeways. Even like when I realized, like, hey, I'm doing something that I enjoy, and it wasn't necessarily where I stayed, and that wasn't my complete end game. But I think there's different points in life that that just sort of hits. Specifically here at Vayner, yeah, that it happens to me all the time, in a great way. It's really, really refreshing to kind of be able to look around and say, like, hey, the people that I'm working with are great. Like, these people are my friends. They appreciate me. They appreciate what I'm doing. And like, holy crap! Like, also, like, look where I'm working. Like, this is really, really fun. And honestly, for me, like the biggest part about it is that just I love what I'm doing. Like, it's not something that I could necessarily say earlier in my life. Like, I didn't love what I was doing when I was working at a Starbucks or working, doing data entry at a random place. Like, I didn't really enjoy what I was doing, and I was not really happy at that point. And that's not necessarily to say that, like, you're not happy if you work at Starbucks. Like, maybe you love coffee, maybe you love what you do, and that's awesome. But it just, at that point in my life, I wasn't satisfied with what I was doing. So taking a moment every once in a while to kind of like stop what I'm doing, look around, and appreciate where I am, is something that's become really, really important to me.
And what would you say to people in that situation? People that are working a job that they're not too happy to be at, they're just not content with where they're at in life right now. What would your advice be to those people? What would you say to them?
Figure out a way to try different things. And I say that because when I was working those things, I was working three things at once. I would work at Starbucks during the day, and then work a catering gig real fast in between, my morning shift and bartending at night. I would just try to pack as much in as possible and meet as many people as I possibly could. And I wasn't necessarily in like the best part of New York to do that. Like, I was in Westchester, where there's not a ton necessarily going on. But try different things. That's the number one piece of advice that I could give, and it's something that I can look back on and say, like, hey, I tried different things. Like, in college, I worked at a Dick's Sporting Goods for 2 days before I realized I don't like this. Like, I'm just not built for this. This isn't me. And it sucks in the moment. It definitely does. And it feels like you're never going to get out of that repetitive cycle, but it happens, and it takes time.
And who are you consuming right now? I was just curious who you've been watching to or listening to that's really caught your eye.
Ooh, it's a good question. So podcasts, I almost exclusively listen to automotive podcasts. And at that, like, I listen to like half an episode a day, just because like I listen pretty much on my commute, because during the day I'm editing podcasts. I listen to, the number one podcast I listen to is The Smoking Tire. It's just like a conversation, and it's completely about the automotive industry. And I listen to regular car reviews. I listen to, I've just started listening to, what's the name of it? When I just need some like humor, Call Her Daddy by Barstool. I've of course been listening to the Tartar Project, which is a friend of mine, Phil's podcast, where he interviews some super interesting people. And on the YouTube front, it's fairly similar. A lot of car related channels. Like, that's really what I focus heavy on. Like, I focus heavy on my hobbies in that way.
And do you ever listen to the audio experience? Like, or is it weird for you now to go back and listen to it now that you're not the one editing it after doing it for so long?
Every once in a while, but I don't think I've listened to a full episode since, to be completely honest. And if Gary ends up listening to this, I'm sorry. But it's not something that I'm really putting my energy behind anymore. So it's kind of hard for me to necessarily listen to, because I also don't want to like point out flaws that I see or in levels or things like that. Or I do, and I'll tell whoever's doing it right now. But no, I haven't in a while actually. I still watch GaryVees. I still watch the video content, but the audio content I've kind of focused on letting be consumed by like my hobbies and what I'm focusing on.
I'm going to be honest with you, man. I hope Gary does hear that, just because that means that he'll have listened to my podcast. I know that the odds of that are extremely small, but I end every podcast episode with the same set of standard questions. And the first one here is, if you were going to dinner and you could take 3 people, they could be anybody from any point in time, dead or alive, who would you take to dinner?
Ooh, oh man, this is the hardest question. Good question. Elon Musk, because I love what he's doing in just for both the world in general and pushing the automotive industry to a new place. Who else? Steve Jobs, for a very similar reason. He revolutionized the technology industry and the social industry and a lot of different industries that we are involved in today. And the third one, ooh man, Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, because he's who motivated me to pursue music in the first place.
Do you ever foresee somewhere down the line where you get back into music?
I've definitely toyed with it. I miss playing, and every once in a while, I'll kind of like envision it in my head. I can see myself kind of like joining another band just for fun. Yeah, for sure.
I think that'd be awesome. But next question is, what's the best advice you've ever been given?
Ooh. From my dad, that like it's more important to be doing something that you enjoy than to be making a lot of money. And that money comes, but happiness does not necessarily.
I really like that advice. What's one thing about you that people wouldn't expect?
That's a great question. I was a competitive swimmer in college.
Believe it or not, I actually did know that, and I meant to ask, but I completely forgot.
All good.
But what was that like when you were swimming in college? Was Olympics ever a goal of yours? Like, how did that happen?
No, Olympics were definitely never a goal. I did it more for fun. SUNY Purchase is a very heavily like arts school, so it's very heavily music and theater and art and kind of the things that revolve around that focused, rather than sports. It's very, very not a sports school. That said, I lifeguarded all throughout high school and college, and my sophomore year, I was like just doing laps in the pool with a friend, and I can't remember who came up to me. It might have been like the coach. Was like, hey, like you look like you're pretty good at swimming. Like, would you be interested in joining the team? And like it was my freshman year, and at the time it was just like a club team, so like they weren't in a D1, D2, or D3. But they were just like, they would swim against teams that were in pretty much D3 for fun. And I was like, yeah, why not? So I did that. And then my sophomore year, we became an actual D3 team. And I just sort of did it from there. And it was, it was 4 years essentially, or 3.5, I want to say, of 5 a.m. practices and competitiveness. But I think that's also what pushed me to be a little bit competitive, because I definitely never was in the past. But diving into that helped me with that a lot. But there's a pun in there.
I was going to ask if that pun was intended or not.
Definitely wasn't, but now it is.
But what's one thing that's so important everybody needs to know?
One thing that's so important everyone needs to know. Good question. I would say, man, I'm drawing a blank here.
If you can't think of anything, man, don't worry. We can always kind of just skip this one. It's up to you, though.
Let's come back to that one.
Yeah, no worries, man. We can come back to that. But this is usually the last question, and I kind of like to flip the script on the guest a little bit. And I want to know one question you want to know the answer to about anything.
About anything. Why does turbulence exist when you're flying?
Okay, I've never had anybody ask that question before, but I'm assuming that you're not a big fan of turbulence. I mean, I don't think anybody really is.
I am not. Scientifically, I know why more or less why it exists, but like, just why? Why couldn't it just all be smooth?
That's awesome. Like I said, I've never had anybody take that last question in that direction before, but Before we wrap up here, I just wanted to ask you again one more time if you could think of one thing that's so important everyone needs to know. Again, if you're still kind of struggling with the question, man, no worries. We can skip this and just go straight to the outro.
I guess just like focus on what makes you happy. Like life is too short to not be happy in one way or another, and like just focus on what makes you happy.
That is a great note to go out on, man. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on this podcast. I wanted to give you the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug everything and anything you got right now.
Yeah, I'm on pretty much every social channel at Seth Feingersh. It's at SETH, F as in Frank, EIN as in Nancy, GER, S as in Sam, H. Instagram, Twitter, I think Facebook, LinkedIn, somewhere in there too. But pretty much across channels there, yeah.
Awesome, man. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below. And I want to thank you once again for coming on this podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening, whether you've listened the entire way through, or you've only listened to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking the time to check this out. Guys, do me a favor, go and follow Seth on Instagram, Twitter, connect with him on LinkedIn. Like I said, I'll make sure everything is linked in the show notes down below. And if you'd like to connect with me, come say hi. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at @TheJacobKelly. You can search me up on LinkedIn and YouTube by searching up Jacob Kelly. If you'd like to watch the podcast, you can watch it on YouTube by searching up My Social Life, or watch micro clips on Instagram at @MySocialPod. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.